And the very last thing to talk about would be the data, right? If we look at all of that, having talked about numbers, having talked about how we convert over the status codes, which are kind of like numbers, but really what I want is messages, because each of those codes have a number. When I look at my data at the end, right, and I still look at the data in the database, I'm still looking at a case where, hey, the data coming from the database is still in English, right? If I look at my genres, they're still in English. If I look at my movies, they're still in English, right? So how can I go about translating this stuff? So the good news with the genres, I think we already did it. I think if we look at the movie list fragment, we already translated it here. I guess it wasn't there. It was, oh, no, we didn't, right? I actually didn't change it. So here, I'm getting the genres from the database with their name and ID, using that to populate the spinner. So those are always going to appear in English, right? How can I get the genres to appear in the user's language, say in Spanish? How can I get those genres, how can I get that database data to appear in Spanish? There are some options here. There's more than one way to solve this problem. Okay. So like genre Spanish. Okay, that's one idea. Okay. Any other options? Yeah. Yeah, I could make a map, right? I could put a map in here based on the language and say, based on the language, use this name, right? So I could actually put a map in the database. Absolutely. It's very nice that you can easily do that in a NoSQL database. Because that's not easy. If we were doing a SQL database, that means an entire another table, right? Now I need the genre names table just to go figure out what language it's in. I need a whole nother table. Fortunately, I don't have to do that with a NoSQL database. So that's helpful. That is very, very helpful. Okay. What else could I do? Could I do the translation on the client side? Do I know all the genres ahead of time? Yes and no. I mean, if I know all the genres ahead of time, then I can just write in a big switch statement. Say, hey, if it's action, then show this string. This string resource. If it's romance, show this and this and this. And then I'm kind of at the end, I'm saying, well, if it's none of those, if it's the default case in that switch statement, then just show it in English. That's a viable solution. That is a viable solution. We could just say, okay, we're going to do translation on the Android system and use a switch statement, and that just means, okay, if we need to add another genre, I just need to push out another update to get those to appear in their local language. And so I can either, while that's happening, leave them in English, or I could just not show them in the dropdown. I could work around that. It would probably be easier to do it on the database side, I would say, because then I don't have to push out a new version of the code if I have a new genre, right? Does that make sense? Then I just roll out the code change once to have it figure out the name based on their language, and we're good from there, right? So let's say I do want to add that map. Add field, right? I might want to say, let's add a field. And so So you might see it something like I-18N is sometimes what you see as internationalization is sometimes that acronym, or we could say translation, etc. Or I could say locale. There's a bunch of different ways we could say this. Maybe I'll just call it languages for the moment. So languages, this is a map. Because there's actually kind of two ways to approach the map. One way to approach the map is I could say, hey, let's make a language map and a description map and whatever other maps I need to do. So oftentimes it makes more sense, though, is maybe to do a map of maps where I say, hey, here is EN. This is a map. And name is action. ES map name, go back here, Google Translate, action, copy that, go back here. And so if I'm expecting to translate multiple fields, it might make sense to do something like this. Right? So I say, hey, languages, here's the particular, take the particular language from the locale, feed it into here, and using locale.getDefault on the client side, and using that to figure out which one to show. And that way I could do this from the database perspective if I needed to. Obviously, if you have somebody that's able to have like a front end to this database, right now I'm just manually editing this data directly. If I had some sort of front end, then that front end would also need a way to put those things in. Cool. Does that make sense? So that's usually what that would mean from the database side, is that I would need to use some sort of map to represent it on the back end, to represent the different translated versions of this. It's worth mentioning here, you know, I kind of prefaced on here, you know, hey, if I have more than one field, this makes more sense, rather than what I could have done is just, I gotten rid of that name level, because the only thing I'm translating is the name. I'm making room for, say, a description and other things. What happens if I get to the point and say my games, they're in 100 different languages? That's going to be a pretty big map at some point if I have a lot of languages in here, right? So there is some merit to doing it this way until you get to scale. If we're talking about doing this at large scale, then you probably do need to add another collection, right? Then I might want to add like a genre languages table, right? And so then every entry, every document in there would be a combination between the language and the genre. Or game languages, movie languages. I might have that be a combination of the movie plus the language. So I might have like, maybe a matrix colon EN and a matrix colon ES, and that would have the translation data for those. You do it either way, right? That might scale a little bit better if you're working with more documents, but it does mean that anytime I go fetch a game, I have to do 2 gets, 2 reads, instead of 1, right? The benefit of doing it this way is I don't increase the number of reads I have to do to get the translation. Make sense? It's a bigger document that I'm fetching back, and unfortunately I'm fetching back all of the languages, even if I don't need them, but I'm still doing 1 read. So, give and take. Cool? Any questions? Does that answer some of the outlying kind of issues with translation? You kind of understand how to work with the numbers, how to work with the dates, how to work with the database side of things and the server side of things. And you know, obviously one of the things to understand here is we're talking about there's a bunch of different systems, and the system you use really depends on what kind of problem you're solving, right? Part of it depends on where the data is coming from and how the data is getting to you.